Welcome to the Business of Sound. My name is David Segura, and I'm the co-founder of Glassbox Media and your host for today's podcast. As always, our hope for this show is to give people actionable advice that ultimately makes you a better podcaster, whether you're a host, a marketing executive, or even a brand. On today's episode, we're going to have a condensed version of our news rundown, not just pumping Glassbox information, which always gets us excited, of course, but also industry news that we think you'll find helpful today. So as an example, we're going to be running down Edison Podcast Metrics, Oprah Winfrey's podcast network deal, which is a really hot topic right now in the industry, as well as Libsyn's new Spanish language platform. Apart from that too, we do have a few topics we want to cover that pertain to Glassbox, but we promise you should find them interesting. So sit back, relax, and get ready to join us on an exciting journey through the world of podcasting. All right, so the first topic that's actually kind of interesting, I don't know how many of you are actually baseball fans out there, but Edison Podcast did some research recently that basically presented information on the top podcast genres, analyzing 200 shows, and basically showing what outperformed. They did a very, very aggressive baseball and Moneyball sort of comp, where their formula, if I want to break it down a little bit, is essentially just tapping into average at-bats among the top 200, which they define as hits, divided by the number of times the genre appeared in the top 20,000, basically roughly defined as its at-bats. And the bigger takeaway, and the reason why we're suggesting you actually read this article, is that it really kind of called out that true crime has the quote-unquote highest batting average among other genres, followed by comedy, followed by the news category, and then science and history. So when we think about this here at Glassbox, we'll be the first to tell you that our personal philosophy is that we want to sign up amazing podcasters, which brings something to the table that's unique and passion-filled. At the end of the day, we're a little less concerned as to whether or not you're a true crime or comedy-focused podcast, and more, are you in it for the long haul? Do you already have a meaningful relationship with your audience? And do we see you growing potentially into the next, dare I say, Joe Rogan or call her daddy? If the answer to some of those questions are yes, we're going to move forward with you regardless of genre. But we do think this article is very interesting, and we do encourage you to check out Edison Podcast Metrics. Beyond that, one thing we also want to talk about is Oprah Winfrey's podcast network. I don't know how many of you are familiar with her podcast network, but of course everyone out there in media land is obviously very familiar with Oprah Winfrey. Long story short, Bloomberg recently covered a deal that we find pretty interesting, and from what we understand, I think she's exploring either renewing or potentially seeking a new home that might be different from SiriusXM. For those of you that don't know, SiriusXM is obviously a major player, not just in the audio industry and podcasting industry, but radio and a lot of other legacy businesses. So it's really intriguing to me that this content is being hotly pursued and being repurposed in new formats, mainly podcasting. At this point, per the article in Bloomberg, don't quote me, quote them, the potential for a new renewal is up to $10 million. And honestly, I would argue potentially a lot more than that. I think the biggest takeaway here is that even in a media-constrained environment, it's very much the case that, these deals continue to be hot. Young Americans were able to tune into podcasts at nearly the same rate as they are for TV. According to both Edison Research and Trident Digital, 41% of Americans aged 12 or older listened to a podcast in the past month. And we find that obviously very incredible. What it's basically suggesting is that podcasts are nearly as popular with younger Americans as linear TV is. Now, while it's obviously going to take some time for media habits to change in America, it does bode well for not just Glassbox, but almost anybody who has a commitment to audio and podcasting in general. So that's ultimately something that I think that is exciting and that potentially could bode well for the industry. Additionally, too, while it is the case that people that are maybe a bit older, in this case over 55 and up, while only 14% of them have listened to podcasts, 74% of them have watched TV, whereas radio comes in at 68%. The obvious takeaway here is that there's a lot of room for growth of the older audience, but the fact that 50% of people in the 18 to 34-year-old age group do listen to podcasts actually is a great sign, and it means that this is really a sticky industry that, dare I say, if it doesn't replace TV, is significantly, running in parallel to it. So that's good news for us, but hopefully good news for you too as a podcaster. Beyond that too, we wanted to mention that a friendly rival, we should say, the Libsyn community, actually is unrolling a new platform that is now going to be available in Spanish. It's actually something that is really intriguing because it's tapping into an audience that has traditionally been underserved, not just in the US, but also in Latin America. So whether it's a Glassbox, project or something beyond that, we're always one to encourage the democratization of opportunity and access. And I think this is a good example of something that helps accomplish that. So we are definitely very, very intrigued to hear more about anyone innovating in a way that makes content more accessible. So we're intrigued to be following this, and we strongly encourage you to read up on these new developments, specifically around Libsyn. In terms of Glassbox media news, there's really two bits of information I want to share. One of those things I do want to call out is that our very own Andrew Gold, the host of On the Edge with Andrew Gold, recently has been making a very concerted push into video advertising and specifically video programming. Just as of last week, he actually was able to achieve 100,000 subscribers, which is a very meaningful metric of engagement and success in the YouTube ecosystem. So not only are we incredibly proud to be his partner, but we see this as a sign of where things are going. While we definitely are very much committed to audio in the podcasting space, we would argue, as well as a lot of our listeners, that video is increasingly being seen as a very legitimate and fast-growing area within the podcasting ecosystem. So as a consequence of that, it's something that not only will he be doing more of, but the company will as well. Additionally, when I want to pick out another new item to speak through, I would basically highlight the fact that our very own Gary Arndt, who's the host and creator of Everything Everywhere Daily, was recently picked by Apple as having a great podcast and was featured in a category that is basically aimed at helping families with kids kind of come together over brand safe content. So the fact that his podcast plays well with adults who maybe value learning, travel, history, his topics of focus, but it's brand safe enough for a family to listen to together is a great sign. So I'm proud of our marketing team for getting that message out there, and also happy that Apple was able to select it as something very much in demand and something worthy of their listeners' attention. So shout out to our friends over at Apple. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Business of Sound. As always, this show is produced by Erica Miranda and Nick Kastner. New episodes will be released every Thursday for the foreseeable future, and if you enjoyed this, please consider giving us a 5-star review to help support the show. Additionally, if you'd like, we'd be more than happy to have you follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn or your social platform of choice. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in a new episode.